Nobody told the baby that the man he was sleeping on was supposed to be dead by morning. 18 months old, cheek pressed flat against Ji-hoon Kang's chest. One tiny hand curled open over the man's heart like he was listening for something. Breathing slow, completely at peace. The most feared man in Seoul lay before him, his eyes unblinking, his jaw hanging loosely, with a look on his face that even his closest lieutenants wouldn't have recognized. Because in 17 years of running the Kang Empire, no one had ever seen Ji-hoon Kang look like something inside him had stopped fighting. The poison was still in his blood. The doctors had confirmed it 6 hours ago. Synthetic compound, military grade, no antidote, 12 to 24 hours. His own men were already making quiet phone calls in the corridor downstairs, already deciding who would step into the gap he was going to leave. And yet, his breathing had slowed from a drowning man's gasps to something that almost resembled sleep. The clench in his hands, the white-knuckle grip he'd maintained on the bed sheets since midnight, had gone loose. The pain still sat in his chest like a stone, but the fire had pulled back, just enough, just barely enough that he could think in full sentences again. He had not moved the child. He did not fully understand why. He understood very little about what was happening to him right now, and Ji-hoon Kang was not a man who tolerated not understanding things. But the baby had climbed onto him in the dark. He had felt the small weight settle. He had felt the warmth spread against his sternum like something deliberate. And the first coherent thought he'd had in hours was don't move, so he hadn't. But before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The Hanum deal had gone perfectly. That was what made it so clean, so humiliating. Everything had gone as planned, yet he still walked away on the brink of death. The room had been full of the right people saying the right things. Glasses raised, handshakes held a second too long the way they always were when men who didn't trust each other were pretending otherwise. He always did, just one. He was cautious, always cautious, ever since he was 19, when he learned in the most permanent way possible what happens to men in this world who let their guard down, even for a moment. One glass. One glass was all it took. He felt it on the drive home, a heat in his stomach that had no business being there, spreading upward with a patience that told him immediately it was not food, not alcohol, not anything natural. He had his phone out before the car reached the highway. His private doctor met him at the gate. The diagnosis took 11 minutes. The prognosis took 30 seconds. 12 hours, the doctor had said. Then, reading Ji-hoon's face, quietly revised, perhaps 24 given your condition. But Mr. Kang, there is no treatment for this compound at this stage. I'm sorry. Ji-hoon had nodded once, dismissed the man and walked upstairs. He didn't call his second in command. He didn't summon his lawyers, his lieutenants, or the 3 men whose sole responsibility was to handle exactly this kind of crisis. He closed the door to his private suite, the room in the east wing that no staff entered without direct summons. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, contemplating the fact that after everything, 17 years of surviving things that should have killed him, it would be one glass of whiskey, at a table full of men who smiled to his face, that would bring him down. He almost laughed. It came out wrong. He stopped. By midnight the pain had become serious. By 2 a.m. it had become something else entirely. A full-body siege, his heart stuttering in his chest, his vision going gray at the edges every time he tried to sit up. He had his phone in his hand and put it back down 4 times. There was no one to call. There had not been anyone to call for a very long time, and he had chosen that. He had built that emptiness deliberately and maintained it the way other men maintained fortunes. Carefully, consistently, with full knowledge of what he was doing. The blackout hit at 2:31, the backup generators didn't come on, and somewhere in the dark, a door he was certain had been closed swung open. He heard it before he saw it. A soft sound, small and purposeful, the particular rhythm of someone moving who had no idea they were supposed to be quiet. Then the weight at the foot of the bed. Then the slow, determined crawl upward across the mattress, pausing twice, resuming, until something warm and solid pressed against his left side and simply stopped moving. Ji-hoon turned his head. The child looked back at him with the enormous, unimpressed eyes of someone who had just found a perfectly acceptable place to sleep, and saw no reason to explain himself further. Then he yawned. A full jaw-cracking, completely unbothered yawn, laid his cheek on Ji-hoon's chest and closed his eyes. Ji-hoon stared at the ceiling. The warmth spread. He told himself it was just body heat. Simple physics, a small body generating warmth against his chest, slowing his breathing by instinct, his nervous system reacting to the presence, the way any human body would in the dark. There was nothing miraculous about it. He was a practical man. He did not believe in signs or mercy, or the idea that the universe occasionally looked at a dying person and decided, not yet, His heartbeat steadied. The fire in his chest pulled back another degree. He did not move the child. Aisha found them at 2:49 a.m. She came through the door with her heart in her throat and her eyes already scanning, and then she stopped. Because what she saw in that room made no immediate sense to the part of her brain responsible for danger assessment, and she had trained that part of her brain very well over the last 3 years. Ji-hoon Kang lying flat on his back, her son on his chest, both of them breathing. She crossed the room, reached for Theo. Don't. The word stopped her hand in the air. She looked at Ji-hoon's face. He was watching her with eyes that were exhausted and burning, and stripped of every layer she had ever seen on a powerful man's face. The performance, the authority, the careful management of how much they let you see. All of it gone. Just a man in the dark, holding very still around something that was keeping him alive. The pain, he said. His voice came out rough, like it cost him. It's less. Aisha looked at her son. Theo's fingers had found Ji-hoon's shirt pocket, and were holding on loosely in sleep the way he held things he decided were his. I'll stay outside the door, she said quietly. Ji-hoon didn't answer. His eyes had dropped back to Theo, and then, slowly, like a man who hadn't made a gentle movement in years, and wasn't sure his hands still knew how, he rested one palm against her son's back. Aisha walked to the doorway, then stopped. She leaned against the wall outside, her eyes closed, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She stood there until morning. At 6 a.m., the doctor checked Ji-hoon's vitals and went very quiet for a long time. Mr. Kang, he looked up from the monitor, then back down, then up again. The compound in your blood, the levels have, this rate of decline is not, I've never seen. He stopped himself, started again. Medically, I cannot explain what happened overnight. Theo was awake now, standing in Ji-hoon's lap on unsteady legs, both fists locked in the collar of his shirt, babbling with the conviction of someone making an important point. Ji-hoon sat still beneath him. He was looking at the child the way a man looks at something he doesn't have the vocabulary for yet. The doctor's eyes moved to Theo. Then back to his chart, he wrote significant stabilization overnight. Cause undetermined, status upgraded from critical. He left without saying anything else. In the corridor, Aisha was still leaning against the wall. The doctor paused when he saw her, looked at her for a moment with an expression that sat somewhere between science and something science couldn't touch. He's going to live, the doctor said. Aisha held his gaze. Good, she said. She said it the right way, warm, relieved, the way anyone would say it. She was very good at saying things the right way. Ji-hoon did not tell anyone what had happened in that room. Not his second in command, Ryu Suk, who appeared at his door at 7 a.m., with the careful face of a man who had spent the night preparing to take over, and was now recalibrating rapidly. Not his lawyer, who called twice before noon. Not the 3 lieutenants, who filed into the East Wing sitting room by 8 o'clock, with the particular energy of men who had been caught mid-betrayal by someone's inconvenient survival. He sat at the head of the table in yesterday's shirt, and told them the antidote had worked, that the doctor had found a solution overnight. That whoever had ordered the hit at Hannam would be identified within 48 hours, and they would all behave accordingly. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked at each other. They nodded and filed out, and Ji-hoon watched them go with eyes that catalogued everything. Who exhaled with relief, who exhaled with disappointment, who kept their face so carefully neutral it was its own kind of answer. He had one name by the time they reached the stairs. He'd have the rest by nightfall, but that was later. That was the part of his life that ran on its own momentum, that had run on its own momentum for so long it barely required him anymore. He dealt with it the way he dealt with everything. Precisely, without emotion, efficiently. And then he walked back down the East Wing corridor and stood outside the supply room door and listened. Theo was awake, he could tell by the sound. A series of small, determined thuds that suggested the child was throwing something repeatedly against the floor, and finding this extremely funny. There was no other voice in the room, which meant Aisha was somewhere else on the floor, still working, because apparently the woman had not slept in over 24 hours and was still pushing a mop. Ji-hoon stood in the corridor for a moment, then he opened the door. Theo looked up from the floor where he was sitting, surrounded by what appeared to be an entire unrolled cylinder of paper towels, a plastic cap from a cleaning bottle, and the worn stuffed elephant that had seen significantly better days. He looked at Ji-hoon with the evaluating squint of someone deciding whether this new arrival was interesting or not. Then he held up the plastic cap. Ji-hoon looked at the cap, looked at the child, crouched down to the floor slowly, the way his body was still asking him to move carefully today, and held out his hand. Theo placed the cap in his palm with the solemnity of a business transaction. Ji-hoon turned it over once, set it on the floor between them. Theo immediately picked it up and handed it back. Ji-hoon set it down again. Theo picked it up. This went on for longer than Ji-hoon would ever admit to anyone in his life. This specific, wordless, completely absorbing exchange, and by the third round something had shifted in his chest that he could not name and chose not to examine. Theo, he said the name like he was testing the shape of it. He'd heard Aisha say it through the door. Theo looked up at the sound of his own name with an expression of alert interest, realized no food was being produced, and went back to the cap. Ji-hoon almost smiled. He caught it before it finished forming, and put it back wherever it came from. But it had been close. Closer than anything had been in years. He found Aisha at the end of the corridor 20 minutes later, on her knees cleaning the baseboard with the focused attention of someone who had decided to make this particular baseboard her entire world for the next 5 minutes. He watched her for a moment without announcing himself. Not the way he watched his men, calculating angles and exits, but the way he found himself watching her more and more lately without fully deciding to. The set of her shoulders, the efficiency of her movements, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. The way she worked like the work itself was the point, not the performance of working. She knew he was there. He could tell by the slight, stilling, barely a second, barely anything, before she continued. You should have gone home, he said. After last night, Aisha sat back on her heels and looked up at him with the composed, neutral expression she wore in his presence like a uniform. My shift doesn't end until 8. It's past 9, he said. There was a pause. I wanted to finish the corridor. Ji-hoon looked at the corridor. It was immaculate. It had probably been immaculate since 6 a.m. You haven't slept. I'm fine, she said. I didn't ask if you were fine, she met his eyes then. And for a moment the composure had a seam in it. Something quick and assessing moving behind her expression before the surface closed back over. I'll finish up and go, she said. Theo needs a real nap anyway. There's a room. The words came out before he had completed the thought behind them. Ji-hoon did not make unplanned statements. He noted this with the remote, slightly alarmed part of his brain and continued anyway. In the West Wing. Staff guest quarters. It's not being used. You can sleep there today, both of you, and finish the corridor tonight. Aisha stared at him. It's a practical arrangement, he said. You're more useful to me at full capacity than you are running on no sleep making errors. I don't make errors, she said. Everyone makes errors on no sleep. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't fully read, which was unusual. Ji-hoon could read most people inside 30 seconds. Aisha's face had layers he kept finding new ones in, and he didn't know yet whether that intrigued him or unsettled him. Probably both. Probably that was the same thing. Okay, she said finally, quietly. Thank you. He nodded once, turned to go. Mr. Kang, she called. He stopped. Last night, she said, staring at the floor now, not him, her hands still around the handle of her cleaning brush. I'm not sure what to say about it, but I'm glad you're still here. Ji-hoon stood with his back to her for a moment. Outside, through the skylight, the last of the morning rain was clearing and the light was coming through pale and clean and new. Go sleep, he said. He walked away before either of them could add anything else. The room he gave them was 3 times the size of the apartment Aisha rented in Mapogu. She stood in the doorway with Theo on her hip and took it in. The wide bed, with actual pillows, the window with afternoon light coming through thin curtains, the small adjoining bathroom with hot water that she confirmed almost immediately ran within 5 seconds of turning the tap. Theo squirmed to get down and she let him, watching him toddle across the floor toward the window with his arms out for balance, delighted by the space, by the echo his steps made on the hardwood, by the absolute freedom of a room with no obstacles or sharp corners he'd been warned away from. Aisha sat on the edge of the bed. She had not intended to sleep in this house. She had not intended a lot of things that were currently happening. She reached into her bag and took out her phone, stared at it for a moment. There was a message from a number she kept under a contact name that was just a string of numbers. No name, nothing identifiable, the kind of contact that didn't exist on paper. She read it once, typed a short reply, deleted the thread, put the phone face down on the mattress beside her. Theo had found the curtain and was examining it with great seriousness, bunching the fabric in both fists. Come here, baby, she said softly. He came. He always came when she used that voice, the quiet one, the real one, not the careful voice she used in the corridors of this house. He climbed into her lap and she wrapped both arms around him and pressed her face against the top of his head, and stayed very still. The room was warm. Outside, Seoul was going about its afternoon. Somewhere in the East Wing, the most dangerous man in the city was alive because her son had fallen asleep on him. And she was sitting in a bed he had offered her. And things were moving in a direction she had intended, and also, increasingly, in directions she had not. Theo patted her arm twice with a flat palm, the way he did when he sensed something he didn't have words for yet. I know, she said, to him, to herself, to the room. She lay down, pulled him close, stared at the ceiling for a long time before sleep finally came. Ji-hoon ate alone that evening for the first time in 3 days without the pain making it impossible. He sat at the long dining table he almost never used, and worked through half a bowl of kongnamul guk, and thought about the child's face when he'd handed him the plastic cap. The absolute seriousness of it. The trust in the gesture, the open hand, the offering, the complete absence of any calculation about whether it would be received well. He had not been on the receiving end of something uncalculated in longer than he could trace. His phone was on the table beside the bowl. It had been buzzing intermittently all day. His men, his lawyer, the ripple effects of last night's near miss, spreading outward through the network like cracks in ice. He handled each one with the efficiency of long practice, sending instructions in brief, precise messages, closing threads as fast as they opened. At 8:47 p.m., he sent a separate message to his head of household staff. 3 sentences. He reread it once, sent it, and put the phone down. The message arranged for a proper crib to be delivered to the West Wing guest room by morning, a set of child-proofing locks for the lower cabinets in the corridor, and a standing authorization for Aisha to access the East Wing kitchen during off hours so the child could eat a real breakfast. He returned to his soup. Outside, the city glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent and enormous, doing what cities do, running on without him the way it would have run on if he died last night. He picked up his chopsticks, ate and stayed. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. Nobody on the staff said anything directly. They were paid well enough to have learned that saying things directly in this house was a fast way to stop being paid at all. But the talk moved through the estate the way talk always moved through closed spaces, in glances, in the pauses before answers, in the particular quality of silence that falls over a room when someone walks in who wasn't expected. What they noticed was this. The East Wing corridor, which had been Aisha's assigned route for 3 months and which nobody had paid any attention to before, had become somewhere Ji-hoon Kang walked in the evenings, slowly, without apparent destination, the way a man walks when he's going somewhere he doesn't want to admit he is going. What they noticed was that the child, the maid's toddler, the baby who had apparently wandered into the boss's room during the blackout and caused some kind of incident nobody had been fully briefed on, had been given a crib in the West Wing, cabinet locks in the corridor, and breakfast authorization in the East kitchen. Resources that the head of household had distributed without explanation, and that nobody had questioned, because the instruction had come from the top. What they noticed was that Ji-hoon, who had not been observed to smile in recent memory, had been seen twice now crouching on the floor of the corridor in his 500,001 suit, doing something with a plastic cap and a toddler that looked, from a distance, almost like a game. The staff said nothing. But they noticed. Theo learned Ji-hoon's name in his own way, which was to say he didn't learn it at all and instead assigned him a new one. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Aisha was finishing the East Wing windows when she heard it. Theo's voice from around the corner, high and certain, announcing something to someone in the particular tone he used when he felt he was being informative. "June," he was saying. "June, June." She came around the corner. Theo was sitting on the floor near the sitting room doorway. Ji-hoon was crouched in front of him with his forearms on his knees, still in his morning meeting clothes, the kind of stillness about him that she had come to recognize over the past week. Not the dangerous stillness from before, the coiled kind that made rooms feel smaller, but something quieter, like a man who had found one place in his life where he was not required to be anything. "June," Theo said again with great satisfaction, and placed both hands on Ji-hoon's face. Ji-hoon held very still and allowed this. Aisha leaned against the wall. Something tugged in her chest, a feeling she catalogued and set aside and would return to later when she was alone. "He can't say the full name," she said. "He does this. Shortens everything." "June is fine," Ji-hoon said. His voice had the slightly altered quality it always had around Theo, lower, slower, sanded down at the edges, like he turned a different frequency on without knowing it. Theo patted his cheek twice, apparently satisfied with the conversation, and then held up both arms to be picked up. The pause lasted less than 2 seconds. Then Ji-hoon picked him up. He stood there in the corridor of his own house, holding a toddler, who had immediately grabbed a fistful of his collar and started examining his shirt buttons with focused academic interest. And he looked like a man who had not been prepared for how natural that would feel, and was now dealing with that information privately. Aisha watched her son's face, the complete ease of it, the trust. She looked away first. He started talking to her in the evenings, not about anything significant at first, nothing that would require either of them to acknowledge that talking was what they were doing. He would find her finishing the corridor and ask something functional. Was the new crib the right size? Did the kitchen staff give Theo any trouble at breakfast? Was the cabinet lock on the third door holding? She would answer. He would stand with his back against the opposite wall, and they would exist in the same space for a few minutes before one of them moved on. But the question shifted. How long have you been in Seoul? Not phrased as a question quite. More like a door left slightly open. Aisha wrung out the mop and didn't look up. 3 years? Where before that? He asked. Lagos. Then London for a year. Then here. She responded. That's a long way. He said. It is. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him deciding something. She had become attuned to the rhythm of his silences, the ones that were just quiet versus the ones that were him at a junction. Why Korea? He asked. She did look up then briefly. Work. And I wanted somewhere that felt different. From everything before, he accepted that. He didn't push it further, which she noted. Most people pushed it further. The implicit question behind it, the one he hadn't asked, the one that was really about Theo's father, and why she was alone, and all the things that made people feel entitled to a woman's history when her history was visible in the face of her child. Ji-hoon didn't ask. He just nodded once and let the answer be what it was. She filed that away. She filed everything away. You? She said. She didn't know exactly why she said it. The question came from somewhere that wasn't the plan, the part of her that kept leaking through when she wasn't paying attention. Did you always want this, all of it? The silence this time was different. No, he said, just the one word. But the weight of it was enormous. She could feel the whole structure of everything he wasn't saying beneath it. All the floors of it, the years of it. I wanted something else, when I was young enough to want things. What happened to it? He pushed off from the wall. Same thing that happens to most things, he said. Someone took it. He walked away down the corridor and she stood with her mop and watched him go and did not let herself feel what she was feeling, or tried not to. She was getting worse at it. The gift appeared on a Friday. Aisha came into the West Wing room after her shift and found a bag sitting on the table near the window. A proper shopping bag, handle tied, no note. She opened it. Inside was a set of children's building blocks, wooden, painted in the particular bold primary colors that babies found impossible to resist. Underneath the blocks was a small padded jacket in Theo's approximate size. Deep navy blue, the kind with the proper lining that Seoul winters demanded and that she had been putting off buying because the good ones cost more than 2 days of her wage. She sat down. She held the jacket for a moment, turned it over, ran her thumb along the stitching. There was no note. There didn't need to be. There was only one person, in this house, who knew that Theo's current jacket had a broken zipper she'd been fixing with a safety pin for the past 2 weeks. Because Ji-hoon had noticed it. She'd seen him notice it, the quick downward glance, one morning in the corridor. The slight tightening around his eyes that she'd recognized as the specific look he got when something wasn't right, and he was deciding what to do about it. She had not expected him to do anything about it. She put the jacket down on the bed carefully, stood up, and walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below where the last of the autumn leaves were coming down off the trees in slow spiraling pairs. Her phone was in her pocket. The contact with the number-only name had messaged again yesterday, checking in, checking progress, applying the particular kind of patient pressure that never raised its voice because it didn't need to. She had replied. Briefly, as always, professionally. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Theo was on the floor behind her stacking blocks. The new ones, which he had taken to immediately with the focused joy of a child who didn't know they were complicated. She listened to the small wooden clicks of one block finding another. The sound of him completely content. The sound of a child who had no idea what world he was in the middle of. June, he said to himself, placing a red block on a yellow one with immense satisfaction. Like it explained everything, like it was simple. Aisha closed her eyes. The evening, it changed. The evening it moved from whatever careful, unacknowledged thing it had been into something. Neither of them could file away anymore. Started with Theo and a fever. It came on fast the way toddler fevers always do, going from nothing to frightening in the space of a single hour. One moment he was fine, building his tower, demanding crackers with the imperious focus he brought to all food requests. The next he was heavy and glassy-eyed in her arms, his small body radiating heat that had no business being that intense, whimpering in the particular exhausted way that made her chest seize regardless of how many times she'd been through it before. She had the thermometer out. 39.4. High, but not emergency high. She knew the difference, had learned the difference through experience rather than choice. She had children's paracetamol in her bag because she always had it. She knew what to do. What she did not have, at 10 p.m., in the wing of a mafia boss's estate, was anyone. She was managing. She was always managing. But Theo was crying now. The real cry, the one that meant he was frightened and hot, and wanted to not feel this way, the cry that no amount of competence and self-sufficiency fully insulated her from. She had the medicine measured out. She had a cool cloth on his forehead. She was sitting on the floor with his head in her lap and she was fine. She was handling it, and then the door opened. Ji-hoon stood in the doorway in a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, like he had come from his office and heard something on the way. He took in the scene. Theo flushed and miserable, Aisha on the floor, the thermometer on the carpet, the small bottle of medicine still in her hand. And he didn't say anything. He simply came in, sat on the floor across from her, and reached out to put the back of his hand against Theo's forehead. Theo looked up at him. "June," he said miserably, an accusation and a comfort at the same time. "I know," Ji-hoon said quietly. "I know, Theo, yeah." He stayed for 2 hours, but he kept it unremarkable. He didn't draw attention to it, didn't make a spectacle of his presence, nor did he look at her in a way that called for recognition. He just stayed, sitting against the side of the bed, while Theo's fever slowly crept down toward manageable, handing her the cloth when she needed a fresh one. Saying nothing when she said nothing, saying low quiet things in Korean to Theo when the child stirred and whimpered. Simple things, nonsense things, the kind of sounds that were less about meaning and more about proof that someone was there. At midnight, Theo finally slept. Real sleep, the deep kind, his breathing even and his face cooler under her palm. The room was very quiet. "You didn't have to stay," Aisha said. She said it to the floor mostly. Her voice came out softer than she'd intended. Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. "I know." She looked at him then, across the sleeping child between them, across the small distance of the room. She looked at him properly. The way she almost never let herself, the way she kept carefully rationed and controlled, because she understood exactly what it cost her to look at him like this. His face in the low light was open in the way it only got in this room, with this child, the armor completely down, just a man on a floor who had stayed because he wanted to, because something in him had quietly and irrevocably decided that this was where he was supposed to be. "Ji-hoon," she said, his name, not Mr. Kang this time, just his name for the first time, and she watched what it did to his face, the brief, involuntary stillness of it, like a key turning somewhere. "You both make me want to live," he said, low, rough, the words of a man who had not said anything true out loud in a very long time and was slightly unprepared for how it felt. "I don't know what to do with that." Aisha held his gaze for one long, devastating moment. Then she looked down at Theo, at his sleeping face, at the tiny hand curled under his chin. The marker stain on his thumb finally faded to almost nothing now. She looked at her son, and she felt the thing she had been refusing to feel for 2 weeks, move through her chest like a current. Warm and terrible and completely catastrophically inconvenient. "Neither do I," she said. She meant it. That was the problem. She meant it completely, from the part of her that had nothing to do with plans or contacts or deleted message threads. She meant it from the part that was just a woman on a floor in the dark watching a man fall in love with her child. She meant it, and it was going to make everything so much harder. The thing about falling was that it didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a moment you could point to later and say, "There, that was when it happened. That was the exact second everything changed." It arrived in accumulation, in the way he started checking the East Wing corridor before his evening meetings, not for security, not for anything he could justify professionally, but because he had learned the rhythm of when she would be there and his feet had started making decisions his brain hadn't fully signed off on yet. It arrived in the way Theo said June now, not as a name anymore but as a category. The way a child says mama or mine, a word that had stopped being a label and become a claim. It arrived in the way Ji-hoon sat through a 2-hour meeting with 3 of his most senior men, and realized afterward that he had made every correct decision, given every correct instruction, and spent the entire time thinking about whether Theo had eaten enough at breakfast. He was not a man who had ever been ambushed by his own feelings. He had spent the better part of 2 decades making sure that was not possible, had built the distance deliberately, maintained it with the same precision he applied to everything, understood that in his world attachment was not a private matter, but a structural weakness that enemies would eventually find and use. He had watched it happen to other men. He had, on several occasions, been the one to use it. He knew all of this. He knew it clearly, completely, with the full weight of 17 years of evidence. He went to the East Wing corridor anyway. Watched she was teaching Theo to clap a rhythm. That was what he found when he came around the corner. Aisha sitting cross-legged on the floor in the corridor, during a break, Theo in her lap, and the 2 of them doing some kind of elaborate, clapping pattern that involved her hands guiding his. A low-sung rhythm coming from her throat. Something in Yoruba that moved like water. Theo was concentrating with his entire face, tongue between his teeth, eyes fixed on their joined hands, getting it wrong and trying again with a focus that was startling in someone his age. Ji-hoon stopped at the corner and didn't come around it. He stood there and listened to her voice, low and unhurried, the melody looping back on itself, completely unguarded in the way she only ever was when she thought no one was watching. He had noticed this early, the two versions of her, the composed surface she wore in his presence, and the real one underneath that came out with Theo, and sometimes increasingly, with him. The real one was warmer and more devastating, and he was aware that wanting access to it was a problem he had created for himself. Theo finally got the pattern right, clapped it back to her clean and perfect, and then looked up at her face to confirm he'd done it, the way children always looked up, not at the thing they'd accomplished, but at the person whose face would tell them what it meant. Aisha's whole face opened. Yes, that's it, baby, that's it. Theo dissolved into the particular full-body laughter of a toddler who has been praised by the right person, throwing himself backward against her chest, and she caught him and held him and laughed too. Her real laugh, the one that came from somewhere unguarded and unmanaged. The one he had only heard a handful of times, and that did something to the center of his chest, each time, regardless of how much he told himself it didn't. Ji-hoon came around the corner. She looked up. The laugh was still in her eyes. It faded slightly at the edges but didn't disappear entirely, which he noted, which mattered to him in a way he wasn't going to examine right now. We're in the corridor, she said, slightly apologetic. I can see that. He crossed to them and lowered himself to the floor without fully deciding to, back against the wall, long legs stretched out in front of him. Theo immediately oriented toward him like a compass finding north. What's the song? Something my mother taught me. She adjusted Theo in her lap. We used to do it every morning before school. She said if you started the day with rhythm you'd move better through everything else. Ji-hoon turned that over. Did it work? Some days, she said. Something crossed her face, not sadness exactly, more like the particular expression of a person touching something they loved that was also far away. She died 4 years ago. I still do the song. He didn't say he was sorry. She seemed like a woman who had been told people were sorry enough times, that it had stopped meaning much. Instead he said, what does it mean, the words? She was quiet for a moment, translating in her head or deciding how much to give him. Roughly, move like water, not like stone. Water finds its way through, stone only breaks. Ji-hoon looked at the ceiling. The corridor light was warm in the evening, the kind of amber that made everything look like it existed slightly outside of ordinary time. My mother had a saying too, he said. I haven't thought about it in years. Aisha waited. She was good at waiting. She didn't fill silences the way most people did. Didn't get uncomfortable and rush to cover them. She just let them exist until something real came through. She used to say the most dangerous man in any room was the one with nothing left to lose. He paused. She meant it as a warning. About my father. But I was 15 and I heard it as instructions. The corridor was very quiet. She was wrong though, he said. I know that now. The most dangerous man in any room is the one who's just found something to lose again. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was watching Theo examine the laces of his shoe with intense investigative focus. But he felt her go still beside him, the particular quality of stillness that meant something had landed. Neither of them said anything after that for a while. Theo untied the lace completely, looked immensely pleased with himself, and held the loose end up as evidence. Ji-hoon retied it. Theo untied it again immediately. Aisha made a sound beside him that was almost a laugh. Ryu Seok came to him on a Wednesday with the careful face that meant bad news delivered tactfully. The men are talking, he said. He said it standing in Ji-hoon's office doorway in a way that communicated he would rather be doing this from a greater distance. About the maid, and the child. Ji-hoon didn't look up from the document on his desk. Men always talk. It's affecting perception. Shin's people have noticed that Ryu Seok chose his next word with visible care. The change, in your routine, in your priorities, they're reading it as vulnerability. Let them read it, Ji-hoon snapped. Ji-hoon. Ryu Seok almost never used his name without a title. It landed with the weight of something serious. Shin already tried to kill you once this month. If he believes you have something, someone worth targeting, then he'll move against me directly. Ji-hoon set the document down, looked at his second-in-command with the flat, even gaze that had ended more arguments than any raised voice in this office ever had. And I'll finish what he started. I've been waiting for a reason to. Ryu Seok stood in the doorway for a moment. He was a careful man, not a good man, none of them were good men, but a careful one, which in this world was the closest you got. And the woman, the child. If Shin targets them, he won't get the chance. Ji-hoon said, you can't promise, Ryu Seok replied. Ryu Seok. The name flat final. I said, he won't get the chance, Ji-hoon yelled. There was a long pause. Ryu Seok looked at his boss, at the set of his jaw, the absolute stillness of him, the particular quality of certainty that was different from his usual certainty. This wasn't strategy, this was something older than strategy. Understood, Ryu Seok said quietly. He left without saying what he was thinking, which was that in 20 years he had never once seen Ji-hoon Kang make a promise like that. He had never seen him have something worth making it for. He wasn't sure if that was the best thing that had ever happened to Ji-hoon. He wasn't sure if it was the worst either. He walked back down the hallway with the feeling of a man watching weather change and not yet knowing what kind of storm was coming. Ji-hoon told Aisha on a Thursday evening. Not everything, not what Ryu Seok had said, not Shin's name, not the specific geometry of the threat that was building around all three of them. He told her enough. He came to the West Wing after 9 o'clock and knocked, which he had never done before, and she opened the door with Theo already asleep behind her and something in his face that made her step aside without asking. He stood in the middle of the room, looked at the sleeping child, looked at her. There are people who will try to use you, he said, to get to me. They may already be watching the estate. He kept his voice level, factual, the briefing voice. It was the only way he knew how to say things he couldn't afford to say badly. I want to move you to the secure floor. You and Theo, better access, better visibility. I can have it arranged tonight. Aisha stood with her arms folded loosely across her chest and looked at him steadily. Is this about the man who poisoned you? Partially, he responded. And the other part, the pause was brief. The other part is that you're here, in this house, and I'm not willing to be careless about that. She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, Seoul moved through its late-night rhythms, indifferent and permanent. The room was warm. Theo's breathing was soft and even from the bed. Ji-hoon, she said, his name again the way she'd said it the night of the fever, like a key, like she knew exactly what it opened and was choosing to use it carefully. If I move to the secure floor, what does that mean? He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and stopped close enough that she had to tilt, her chin slightly to hold his eyes. Close enough that the careful professional distance she had maintained for weeks was simply no longer physically possible. It means I'm done pretending I'm not afraid of something happening to you, he said, low, direct, every syllable placed with intention. It means, you and Theo are not staff to me anymore, you haven't been for a while. I think you know that. Aisha looked at him. At the face she had studied for weeks from the careful distance of corridors and doorways, the hard lines of it, the exhaustion underneath the control, the specific softness that only appeared in certain light, in certain moments that she had been cataloging against her will, and wishes for longer than she wanted to admit. She thought about the phone in her bag, the contact with no name, the plan that had made complete sense 3 months ago when she'd walked through the gates of this estate with Theo on her hip, and a purpose she'd been building toward for 2 years. She thought about a man sitting on a floor at midnight refusing to leave. A navy jacket with perfect stitching. A plastic cap passed back and forth in a corridor like it was the most important transaction in the world. I know, she said quietly. He reached up, slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to reset the distance, to return them both to something manageable. His hand came to the side of her face. His thumb traced once along her cheekbone, the gentlest thing she had ever seen him do, and she felt it move through her like the first note of her mother's song. She didn't step back. Whatever this is, he murmured, I'm not afraid of it. She closed her eyes. Let herself have the moment, just this, before everything else she carried came flooding back in. You should be, she whispered. She hadn't meant to say it. It came from somewhere below intention, below control, from the part of her that was exhausted and compromised and had stopped being simple a long time ago. Ji-hoon's hand stilled against her face. She opened her eyes. His were searching hers, not with suspicion, not yet, but with the careful attention of a man who had survived a long time by learning to hear what people meant under what they said. Aisha, he called. I just mean, she said, stepping back, smooth, measured, back to the version of herself that knew what it was doing. I mean, you should be more careful in general after everything. A breath, a small, real-seeming smile that cost her more than he could see. Don't let your guard down too fast. He looked at her for a moment longer, then something in his face settled, accepted the answer, filed the moment, moved forward the way he moved through everything. I'll have the room prepared tonight, he said. Okay. He moved to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame and stood with his back to her for a moment, the set of his shoulders carrying something she recognized as a man staying with a feeling he wasn't ready to put down yet. You should be, he said. She went still. What you said. He didn't turn around. You should be afraid. There was a pause. That's what I used to tell myself too. Every time something started to matter, he left. Aisha stood in the center of the room for a long moment after the door closed. The phone in her bag felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Theo shifted in his sleep, making a small sound, and she moved to him without thinking, sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her palm flat against his back. Her hands were not steady. She sat in the dark with her son's heartbeat under her palm and her own plan tightening around her, like a rope she had tied herself and could no longer remember why. And she stayed very still and did not let herself cry, almost. The secure floor was on the third level of the main building. Aisha learned this on Friday morning when a woman named Han Kyung-ja, compact, precise, and ageless in the way of someone who had spent decades making herself indispensable to powerful people, appeared at the West Wing door at 7 a.m. with 2 staff members. Her expression was one of someone who had been given instructions she found intriguing but would never admit. The room was larger than anything Aisha had lived in, ever. Not just in Seoul, ever. Floor-to-ceiling windows facing the inner courtyard, a proper kitchen alcove, a separate sleeping area for Theo that had been fitted overnight with a new crib, a small wooden shelf already stocked with books at toddler height, a mobile above the crib that turned slowly in the draft from the heating vent, and threw small colored lights across the ceiling. Aisha stood in the doorway and did not let her face do anything. Theo had no such discipline. He walked in, turned in a full circle with his arms out, and said, "Whoa," with the gravity of someone making an architectural assessment. Han Kyung-ja permitted herself the smallest possible smile. "Mr. Kang asked that you have everything you need. If anything is missing, you inform me directly." She paused. "Not the general staff line, me directly." The distinction was delivered quietly, but it landed with full weight. A woman telling another woman in the language of households and hierarchies exactly what category she now occupied in this building. Aisha met her eyes. "Thank you, Kyung-ja-si." The older woman held her gaze for one measured moment. Something passed through her expression. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition. The look of a woman who had watched this house for a long time and knew what it meant when it changed. Then she nodded once and left. Aisha closed the door. Stood with her back against it. Theo had already found the mobile. The first sign came 3 days later, and she almost missed it. She was in the courtyard, below the main building. One of the few outdoor spaces the staff used during breaks. A narrow stone terrace overlooking the rear garden, when she saw the car. Dark, unmarked, parked across the service road that ran behind the estate's east wall. It had been there when she came out 15 minutes ago. It was still there now, engine off, no visible movement inside. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Most people didn't spend 2 years learning to notice exactly this kind of thing. Aisha finished her tea, went back inside and said nothing. But that evening when Ji-hoon appeared in the secure floor corridor, she looked at him and said without preamble, "Dark sedan, service road behind the east wall, it was there for at least 40 minutes this afternoon. Different plates from this morning but the same model." Ji-hoon went very still. "You saw it this morning too, I see most things." He looked at her with an expression that was half assessment and half something else. Something that moved through his eyes fast and was gone before she could name it. "You didn't say anything this morning. I wasn't sure yet. Now I am." He pulled out his phone, made a quick call in 2 sentences, received a brief answer, and ended the call. He glanced back at her. "Shin's men, surveillance, not yet active threat." A pause. "How did you know what to look for?" Aisha held his gaze steadily. "I grew up in a neighborhood where you learn to read cars and corners before you learn to read books. You don't forget it. It was true. It was also not the whole truth." She had become very skilled, over the years, at answers that were both of those things simultaneously. Ji-hoon studied her face for a moment with the particular attention of a man who had built a life on reading people, and knew when a sentence had a room behind it. But he didn't push. He nodded slowly and looked down the corridor. "Stay off the courtyard until I deal with Shin," he said. "And how long will that take?" she asked. "Not long." The way he said it was very quiet. The quietest things he said were always the ones that meant the most. He dealt with it in 4 days. She didn't ask how. She understood by now the architecture of his world well enough to know that some questions were not about information but about complicity. And she had enough of her own complications without adding his. What she knew was that on Tuesday, the dark sedan was gone, that by Wednesday Ryusak had the particular satisfied exhaustion of a man who had resolved something significant, and that Ji-hoon came to the secure floor on Thursday evening, with the loosened quality about him of someone who had put down a weight. He brought food. That was the thing that undid her slightly. Not the gesture of it, not the romance of it, but the specificity. He had somehow learned without asking that she hadn't eaten a proper dinner since moving to the secure floor because the kitchen alcove didn't stock the things Theo would eat, and she'd been surviving on whatever was left after sorting his meals. He arrived with containers from a Nigerian restaurant 40 minutes across the city, egusi soup, fried plantain, jollof rice still warm, and set them on the counter of the kitchen alcove without ceremony, without performance, without any indication that he considered this remarkable. Aisha stood in the middle of the room and looked at the containers and felt something crack open in her chest that she did not have the resources to close back up right now. How did you know? She said. Her voice came out wrong, too real. Han Kyung-ja, he was opening containers. Matter of fact, finding bowls in the alcove cabinet with the ease of a man who had located things in unfamiliar kitchens before. She mentioned you hadn't been eating. I asked why. She told me, you asked your head of household why your maid wasn't eating. He looked up at that, straight at her. I asked because I wanted to know, he said simply. Stop calling yourself my maid. The instruction landed clean and complete and left no room for argument. Aisha looked at him across the small kitchen alcove, with the warm containers between them and the colored lights from Theo's mobile, turning slow patterns on the ceiling behind her, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost violent, this is the problem. This is exactly the problem. Theo appeared from the sleeping area dragging his elephant by one ear, assessed the food situation immediately, and made directly for the plantain with the focused intention of a man who knew what he wanted from life. Ji-hoon intercepted him smoothly, lifting him with one arm, settling him against his side with the ease of someone who had been doing it for months rather than weeks. Theo grabbed his collar. Business as usual. They ate on the floor, all three of them, because Theo wouldn't sit at the table without making it a negotiation, and the floor was easier. Ji-hoon sat with his back against the couch in his work clothes, eating jollof rice from a bowl, and occasionally redirecting Theo's aggressive approach to the plantain, and he looked so completely and bewilderingly at ease that Aisha had to look away several times to manage herself. Tell me something, she said. Something nobody knows. He considered this seriously, which she had learned was how he considered everything. I used to draw, he said, when I was young, architecture, buildings, structures. I had notebooks full of them. There was a pause. I wanted to build things, design spaces. I was good at it. What happened to the notebooks? The brief silence told her the answer before he did. My father burned them. He had a specific idea about what I was for. His voice was even. The evenness itself was the wound. I stopped drawing after that, seemed pointless. Aisha looked at him, at the man on her floor eating rice with her son on his lap, and 17 years of someone else's blueprint written into every line of him. How old were you? 16. She thought about a 16-year-old boy watching his notebooks burn. She thought about her own things that had been taken, her own blueprints shredded by forces larger than herself. She thought about how people became what they became, not in single moments but in accumulations, in the slow geology of loss pressing down until it changed the shape of everything. You could still draw, she said. He looked at her with an expression she felt in the back of her throat. Maybe, he said. Theo had fallen asleep between them. He'd done it mid-plantain, which was impressive. One moment upright and committed, the next horizontal, completely surrendered to sleep with a piece of fried plantain, still loosely in his fist, like he'd refused to put it down even unconscious. Ji-hoon looked down at him. His face in the warm light was completely unguarded, no performance, no management, just a man looking at a sleeping child, with an expression that was so full it almost looked like pain. I want to tell you something, he said. He didn't look up, and I need you to just let me say it, without the careful answer after. Aisha's heart rate shifted. Okay. He looked up then. His eyes were direct and serious and stripped of every layer he usually maintained between himself and the world. I know this isn't simple. I know what I am and what this house is, and I know that asking anything of you given all of that is a lot. I'm not asking you to ignore any of it. A breath. But I want you here, not because of Theo, not because of the surveillance threat, not for any reason that I can make sound practical. I want you here because this, the three of us on this floor eating on the floor like this, is the first thing in 17 years that has felt like mine. Not the empire, not the reputation. Mine. The room was absolutely silent. Ji-hoon, I'm not finished, not sharp, just steady. The voice of a man who had decided to say the true thing all the way to the end for once. I know you're careful with me. I know there are things you don't say. I'm not asking you to say them tonight. His jaw tightened slightly. I'm asking you to stay. Past the job, past whatever brought you through those gates. Just stay. Aisha looked at him across her sleeping son. I'm here, she said softly. Tonight I'm here. He held her gaze, understood with the precision of a man who listened well, exactly what she had given him and exactly what she had withheld. He nodded slowly. He extended his hand across the sleeping child, palm up. No grasping, no tugging, just an open gesture, the same one Theo made when offering something to someone he trusted. Aisha looked at his hand for a long moment, then she placed hers in it. Ji-hoon closed his fingers around hers, gently, like something he intended to keep. Outside, Seoul ran on through its Thursday night, enormous and indifferent. Inside, in a warm room with a sleeping toddler between them and colored lights turning slow circles on the ceiling, two people sat with their hands joined across everything complicated, and said nothing at all. In her bag across the room, the phone buzzed once. She didn't move to check it. The day everything came crashing down started on a Tuesday afternoon, with a flight of stairs. Not even a full flight, just 7 shallow steps, the decorative ones that led from the indoor garden terrace to the main hallway. The ones with the low stone railing Aisha had noticed when they first moved in, and had made a mental note to keep an eye on. She had been watching, always watching. But in the brief 40 seconds she stepped into the kitchen to turn something off, Theo was fast, and 7 steps were all it took. She heard the sound before she heard him cry, a single sharp crack, small body meeting stone, and then the silence that was worse than crying, the held breath before the scream, and she was already moving before her brain had finished processing what her ears had heard. He was at the bottom, on his side. The cry came then, the real one, the one that meant something was genuinely wrong, and she had him in her arms before she'd finished crossing the terrace. Her hands moving over him the way hands moved when they were operating on love and terror simultaneously, checking, cataloging, his left arm held at an angle that made her stomach drop completely. "Okay," she said, to him, to herself, to the air. "Okay, baby, I've got you, I've got you." His face was the color of shock. His arm was wrong. She knew what a broken bone looked like in a child. She had learned this the hard way years ago, a different child, a different city. And she knew that what she was looking at required a hospital and not the estate's private medical staff and not waiting. She was on her feet with him against her chest before she'd made a conscious decision to stand. Ji-hoon was, in his office on the 2nd floor, when Han Kyung-ja appeared in his doorway. She had worked in this house for 19 years. In that time she had delivered news of deaths, arrests, betrayals, and at least one occasion that nobody discussed anymore, involving a rival family and the East Wing kitchen. Her face, in all of those moments, had remained composed with the particular discipline of a woman who understood that the messenger's expression was itself a form of information, and chose carefully what information to give. She was not composed now. "The child," she said, "they've taken him to Severance. Aisha is with him, his arm." She stopped, collected herself. It appeared serious. Ji-hoon was standing before she finished the sentence. He arrived, at the hospital 11 minutes later. He found Aisha in the corridor outside the pediatric emergency bay, standing with her back against the wall, Theo taken behind a curtain by 2 doctors, her arms wrapped around herself in the posture of a woman, holding her own skeleton together through force of will. She looked up when he came through the door and something moved across her face. Relief and guilt, and something else, something complicated and deep, before she looked back at the curtain. "They're assessing him," she said. Her voice was steady. It cost her. "Left radius, they think, maybe the elbow joint. They need to run imaging." Ji-hoon stood beside her. He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say, and he had never been a man who spoke to fill space. He stood close enough that his arm was against hers and let that be what it was. They waited. After 7 minutes, a young doctor appeared from behind the curtain with a tablet, and the carefully neutral expression of someone about to ask an administrative question in a situation that was not administrative. "I'm sorry to do this now," the doctor said. "For the imaging and the treatment plan, we need the father's medical history, blood type, hereditary conditions, anything relevant." He looked between them. "Is the father?" He glanced at Ji-hoon. "Are you?" "No," Aisha said reflexively. Immediately, the doctor nodded. "Is there a way to reach him? We have some time before the imaging is ready, but it would help to have the information before." "But I don't," Aisha started, stopped. Ji-hoon felt her go still beside him, not the cautious stillness from before. This was different. Something deep within her shifted, a fault line stirring beneath the surface. "I don't have contact with him," she said. Her voice had changed. The steadiness was still there, but something underneath it was fracturing, hairline cracks spreading in real time. "I can give you what I know about his history is..." She stopped again. "Ma'am, if you have any information at all. His blood type is AB negative." The words came out precise and hollow. "No hereditary cardiac conditions. There's a history of... The paternal grandfather had a clotting disorder. It skipped a generation, but it's worth screening for. And there's..." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "There's a rare enzyme deficiency on the paternal side. It's not dangerous, but it affects how he processes certain anesthetics. You need to know that before you give him anything." The doctor was typing rapidly. "How do you know the paternal family history in such detail if you don't have contact?" "Because I know who his father is." Aisha's voice was barely above a whisper now. "I just haven't told him." The doctor looked up, looked between them. made a rapid professional decision to take the information and ask no further questions. I'll flag the anesthetic note immediately, thank you. He disappeared back behind the curtain. The corridor was very quiet. Ji-hoon stood completely still. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way he was not usually aware of it. Measured, deliberate, each one a separate event. Aisha hadn't moved. She stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the curtain where their son had just vanished. Her arms remained wrapped tightly around herself. Her profile, bathed in the corridor light, was sharp and unmoving, as if she had just stepped off the edge of something, suspended in that breathless moment before the fall. Aisha, his voice came out low. Careful. The way you approach something that could break in either direction. She closed her eyes. Ab-negative, he said, quietly, his own blood type. A fact about himself he had known since he was 17 years old. The enzyme deficiency. He paused. My grandfather. My father used to use it to explain why he couldn't drink at certain. It was a family thing. A specific thing. Another pause. Not common knowledge. She said nothing. Look at me. She opened her eyes, turned to face him, and in her face, in the exhausted, fractured, utterly stripped expression of a woman who had run out of ways to hold something, he saw the answer to every question he hadn't known he was asking. He saw it completely. All of it. The shape of the whole thing. How long, he said. Her throat moved. Since before I came here, she responded. You knew when you walked through those gates? He asked. Yes. The word landed between them like something dropped from a great height. Ji-hoon turned away from her, walked 3 steps down the corridor, stopped. His hands were at his sides, and he was doing what he always did when something hit the foundation. Going absolutely still, containing it, keeping the outside surface intact while whatever was happening on the inside happened without witnesses, except she was witnessing. She always witnessed. He turned back around. 2 years ago, he said. The night after the Incheon warehouse deal, there was a woman. He paused. The memory hit him now with a clarity it hadn't before. Because before he hadn't had a reason to examine it this closely. A hotel bar. A woman with careful eyes and a laugh she'd kept in check until for a moment she didn't. A single night he had filed away as an anomaly. Genuine, unexplained, unlike anything before or since, and never fully looked into. That was you? That was me, she responded. You didn't tell me. No, why? She looked at him steadily. Because 3 weeks after that night your network's operation destroyed my brother's life and killed him. Because I spent the next year deciding what to do about it. Because by the time Theo was born, the man I'd spent one night with had become the target I was building toward. Her voice was even. Relentless. She was giving him everything now, all of it, no more management. I couldn't tell you. Telling you meant choosing and I hadn't chosen yet. And now, the question sat in the air between them, simple and enormous. Something moved through Ji-hoon's face, just for a second, just enough. And now, Aisha said quietly, I'm telling you in a hospital corridor because my son needed his father's medical history and I... Her voice broke. The first time, the only time. She pulled it back in one breath. Because he needed you, he has always needed you. I just spent a long time pretending that wasn't true because it was easier than what it meant. Ji-hoon looked at her. At this woman who had walked into his house carrying a weapon built from grief, and used his own son as the blade, and somewhere along the way, put the weapon down without fully realizing she was doing it. Who had loved him against every intention she'd arrived with. Who was standing in a hospital corridor telling him the truth not because it was safe or strategic, but because their child was behind that curtain, and the truth was the only thing left. He crossed back to her in 4 steps. She stayed strong, chin up, eyes focused, ready for whatever came next. What came next was his hand on the side of her face. The same gesture from weeks ago on the secure floor, the same gentleness that still looked like it surprised him every time he managed it. I'm angry, he said, low, honest. I need you to know that. I am, what you came here to do, what you used him for, I am not past that. I don't know when I will be. I know, she whispered, but he is my son. His thumb moved once against her cheek. His jaw was tight with everything he was holding at once. Fury and grief and something so large and disorienting it didn't have a clean name yet. And you are, he stopped, started again. You are the reason I'm alive to be angry. And I don't know what to do with that yet either, neither do I. So we're going in there, he said. We'll be with our son. And when he's safe, home and sleeping, we'll sit down and talk about everything. No holding back, no pretending. All of it. He paused. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Aisha searched his face. You still want an after? Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. At everything she was. The grief and the vengeance and the love and the impossibility of all 3 living in the same woman, in the same story, in this corridor under these lights. Ask me again when I've held my son, he said. He dropped his hand, turned toward the curtain, pushed it aside. Theo looked up from the examination bed immediately. Face tear-stained, left arm in a temporary splint, deeply unimpressed with his entire situation, and saw Ji-hoon. June, he said, with relief, with accusation. With the absolute certainty of a child who had decided long before tonight, long before any paperwork or hospital corridors or truths told in the wrong order, exactly who this person was to him. Ji-hoon sat on the edge of the examination bed. Theo leaned into him immediately, his good arm finding the familiar grip on the collar, his head dropping against the chest that had been his from the very first night. Ji-hoon closed his eyes, one hand cradling the small splinted arm, one hand against his son's back. Aisha stood at the curtain and watched the two of them and felt the full weight of everything she had almost destroyed settle over her, not crushing her, not absolving her, just sitting there, honest and permanent, the way consequences did when you finally stopped running from them. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the nameless contact. She already knew. Checking in, applying patient pressure, waiting for a report on a plan that had stopped being a plan weeks ago and become something she didn't have a word for yet. She took the phone out, looked at the message. Status update. What's happening with Kang? She looked at Ji-hoon, at the curve of his back over their son, at Theo's hand on his collar in the dark. She typed back slowly, deliberately. With the clarity of a woman who had just stepped fully to one side of a line she'd been standing on the edge of for months. It's over. Don't contact me again. She turned the phone off, put it in her bag, walked through the curtain to her family. The attack came on a Thursday night without warning. That was the thing about Shin. He was patient in the way of men who had been underestimated, long enough to learn how to use it. He didn't announce, he didn't posture. He simply waited until the moment when Ji-hoon's attention was divided in exactly the right way, and then he moved with everything he had all at once. Aisha heard it from the secure floor. Not the gate alarm this time. Something worse. The sound of the main building's ground floor entrance going all at once, multiple points simultaneously, the kind of coordinated breach that didn't come from two men with a grudge, but from something planned and resourced and a long time coming. She was on her feet before the first shot. Theo was asleep. She checked him once, deeply under, the heavy sleep of a child on pain medication, undisturbed, and pulled the crib to the interior wall the way Ji-hoon had shown her when they first moved to this floor. Away from windows, away from the door. She had paid attention. She had always paid attention. Her phone showed nothing from Ji-hoon, nothing from Ryu Seok. The estate's internal line was dead. She stood in the middle of the room and thought for exactly 4 seconds. Then she went into the corridor. Then she found Ryu Seok on the second floor landing with two men she recognized from the estate's security rotation. All three of them moving fast toward the east stairwell. He saw her and his face did something complicated. Get back upstairs. A demand, where is he? Delivered in the voice she used when there was no version of this conversation where she went back upstairs. Ryu Seok looked at her for one hard second. Something in her expression must have resolved whatever calculation he was running. East courtyard, they cut the exterior team off. It's not good. She was already moving. You can't go down there, he called after her. She went down there. The east courtyard was chaos rendered in shadow and emergency lighting. She slipped through the service door, quick and low, scanning the scene in an instant. 3 of Shin's men were down already, 2 of Ji-hoon's, and the stone fountain in the courtyard was the only real cover in the open space. She found Ji-hoon in 3 seconds, as she always did, an internal compass she no longer bothered to ignore. He was backed against the east wall, one arm hanging awkwardly, his weapon gone, with Shin's enforcer closing the gap between them, moving with the calm, confident pace of a man who knew the fight was already over. Ji-hoon saw the enforcer's angle. He saw what was coming. He was already squaring up to take it straight because there was nothing left to do. No weapon, no exit, the wall behind him absolute and final. And the expression on his face in that moment was not fear but something worse. Acceptance. The look of a man who had lived in violence long enough to recognize its end when it arrived. Aisha picked up the weapon on the ground, 3 feet from the service door. She didn't think about it. There was no version of what happened next that included thinking about it. There was only the enforcer's back, and the distance, and Ji-hoon's face, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all, that had stopped being a choice somewhere between a blackout storm and a plastic cap, and a Thursday night on a floor eating jollof rice with colored lights on the ceiling. She fired once. Low, stopping shot, clean. The enforcer went down. The courtyard went completely still. Ji-hoon looked across the space at her, at the weapon in her hands, at the woman standing in his courtyard in the middle of his war looking back at him with steady eyes and not a single tremor in her grip. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Ryusak and his men came through the north gate, and it was over. The estate courtyard cleared, the estate's medical team arrived. Ryusak managed the aftermath, with the grim efficiency of a man who had cleaned up after violence before, and would again, and had made his peace with that. Ji-hoon sat on the low wall near the fountain with the estate doctor taping his arm, dislocated shoulder, wrenched back, the cut on his side that was deeper than it looked and had already ruined another shirt. He sat through all of it without making a sound, watching Aisha across the courtyard where she stood apart from everyone, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the ground near where the enforcer had fallen. She hadn't moved since Ryusak took the weapon from her hands. The doctor finished. Ji-hoon stood, walked across the courtyard. He stopped in front of her. She didn't look up. Aisha, nothing. Look at me. She looked up. Her face was composed. The surface fully in place, the careful version, every layer back where she kept them. But her eyes were wrong. Too still. The specific stillness of someone who was holding something so tightly it had stopped having a color. You're okay, he said. I know. You saved my life. I know that too. He looked at her. At the careful expression, the wrongness in her eyes, and the way her arms were wrapped around herself, as if she were the only thing keeping her together. He had seen it before, not on her but on himself. That particular aftermath of a moment when you do something irreversible, and your body hasn't quite caught up to the weight of your decision yet. Hey, he said it quietly, move closer. Where are you? Her jaw tightened. Something cracked behind the careful surface, just a hairline, just enough. I came to this house to watch you die, she said, low, raw. The words coming from somewhere that had bypassed management entirely. I planned it, I built it, I walked in here with your son and she stopped. And then tonight she stopped again. Her eyes were shining now, the stillness cracking. I don't know who I am right now. I had a plan, and it's gone. I love you. But I tried to kill you. I just shot a man to save you, and I don't. Her voice faltered, breaking completely. I don't know what any of that makes me. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment, then he pulled her in, not gently, not carefully. He pulled her in the way you pulled something toward you that you had nearly lost twice in the same night. Completely, both arms, the taped shoulder protesting and neither of them caring. She went rigid for exactly 1 second, and then something in her gave, and she grabbed the front of his destroyed shirt with both fists and pressed her face against his chest, and he felt her breath come in one long shuddering wave and release. He held her, said nothing. Let it be what it was. I know what it makes you, he said at last, his voice low and rough but certain. It makes you someone who chose. When it mattered, when it was real, you chose. He paused. That's all any of us ever are. What we choose when it costs something. She pulled back enough to look at him, eyes wet, face open, the real version, no layers, no management, just her. I'm sorry, she said. For Theo, for using him, for all of it. I know, I need you to know it's real, what I feel. It didn't start real, but it is now, and I need. Aisha. He said her name the way she said his, like a key, like he knew exactly what it opened. I know, she searched his face. How? Because you went into a courtyard with a gun for me. The corner of his mouth moved, barely. A woman running a plan doesn't do that. She lets the plan finish. Something moved through her expression, the last piece of something settling. Above them, the estate was quiet in the specific way of after. That particular held breath silence when the worst has passed, and what remains is just the people still standing. The emergency lighting had clicked off. The ordinary lights were back. Soul glittered beyond the walls, indifferent and permanent, doing what cities did. Ji-hoon stepped back, reached into the pocket of his destroyed shirt. She watched him, wary, wondering. What he pulled out was not a ring, it was a folded piece of paper. Small, soft at the creases, handled many times. He held it out. She took it, unfolded it. It was a drawing, architectural, detailed and precise, the kind of craftsmanship that came from real talent and years of practice. A home, she realized, as she studied it closer. Not a mansion, not an estate. A home. Open plan, a garden running along one side, a children's room with low windows facing east to catch the morning light. Beautiful, thoughtful. Every line drawn with purpose. In the bottom corner, a date, 3 weeks ago. She looked up at him. I told you I used to draw, he said quietly. I started again. There was a pause. I drew what I wanted to build. His eyes held hers. I want to build it with you. The courtyard was completely still. Aisha looked at the drawing in her hands. At the children's room with the east-facing windows. At the date 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when she had still been carrying the plan, still been reporting to the nameless contact, still been telling herself she knew exactly what she was doing here. 3 weeks ago he had been drawing her a home, her throat closed entirely. "I'm not asking you to answer tonight." He said it carefully, deliberately, giving her the out before she needed to reach for it. "I know what tonight was, I know there's still everything we haven't finished saying." A breath. "But I need you to know what I want." Clearly, no managed silences. He looked at her with the stripped, unarmored expression she had first seen on his face in the dark with Theo on his chest. "I want you. I want our son. I want to build something that isn't built on what I inherited." His jaw tightened slightly. "I want to find the men who took Kofi and I want to make it right. Not for you, because it's owed." He paused. "And then I want to ask you a question, properly. And I want you to have had enough time to answer it from the right place." Aisha held the drawing. Felt the paper under her fingers, the realness of it, the weight of a man who had picked up something his father burned down and started again quietly, without announcement, without knowing if it would ever mean anything to anyone but himself. She looked at his face, at the cut on his jaw and the taped shoulder and the destroyed shirt and the man behind all of it, the terrifying one and the real one and the 16-year-old with the notebooks, and the father who said, "Theo, yeah," in the corridor, and the man who had gone completely still in the dark because a baby put his hand over a dying heart, and something in him had decided, not yet. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ask me the question," she said. Ji-hoon went very still. Now? He looked at her for a long moment, then he took one step closer. His good hand came up to the side of her face. The gesture she knew by now, the one that still looked like it surprised him, the gentleness of it sitting slightly at odds with everything else he was. "Stay," he said, "all the way for everything that comes after." His thumb against her cheek, his eyes completely open. "Marry me." The word landed in the courtyard like something alive. Aisha looked at him. The drawing was in her hands. Her son was upstairs asleep with his red cast and his stuffed elephant. Somewhere in the estate, Han Kyung-ja was already organizing the aftermath with the composure of a woman who had seen this house through worse. The city blazed beyond the walls. She looked at Ji-hoon's face, at the question on it, raw and real and waiting, at the man who had drawn her a home with east-facing windows before she'd even decided to stay. Her lips parted, and the camera held, right there, right on his face, on the open, terrifying hope of it, on the eyes of a man who had survived poisoning and betrayal, and a lifetime of chosen emptiness, and was standing in a courtyard with a taped shoulder, asking the most dangerous question he'd ever asked anyone.